Sure. It is very different. So what is happening, and it's something that we need to adapt to and change to, is that we are doing less maintenance on the aircraft because of the newer technology. And we do have an issue in setting up hangars and building infrastructure for small fleets like we have of the A380 that are uneconomical. That will bankrupt Qantas if it continues to do that. Same for the 787s. It doesn't need heavy maintenance for the first 12 years or so. It's different checks that are needed, but the maintenance is very different. And the new technology is having an impact on the maintenance that we need to do. It is going to have an impact on the maintenance footprint we have here in Australia, and that's just that maintenance has disappeared because new technology doesn't need it.
All right, so in 5 years' time, when those two new long-haul aircraft are fully embedded in the fleet, we would expect that figure to be significantly lower than 90%. You're telling us not for industrial reasons, but for engineering and technology reasons.
Because it will not, we've always been clear, it will not be economic for us to do the A380 or the 787 maintenance in Australia because it takes a long time for them to occur. But there's very low levels of maintenance that's needed on those aircraft.
These are very important questions, Senator Ludlam, but I do have other senators who haven't had the opportunity. Can I go to them because... yes, Senator Gallagher.
Mr Joyce, you've consistently said, and I think the transcript will reflect this, we, in respect to the decision made, and on at least 2 occasions you've corrected that and said I. Was there more than one person involved in the decision to ground the airline, or did you?
No, I sometimes use we because I work with a team, but it was my decision.
And there was no consultation with anybody else. So the fact that you've said we repeatedly for an hour in answer to direct questions about this is wrong.
I've said I made the decision very clearly on multiple occasions, and I said that I did consult with the board to get their endorsement, and that endorsement was given unanimously by the board to it. The decision was mine.
Thank you. I'll just read the transcript with interest.
Senator, just out of interest, if I can add, Alan's executive team was not told until midday.
I'm just curious about the we, that's all.
Okay,
it's maybe my phraseology. I use we a lot because I like to involve the team, but on this occasion, to be absolutely clear, I made the decision.
All right, that's been explained. Senator Cameron.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mr Joyce, can I just firstly indicate so many questions, so little time? I'll certainly be arguing. I know I'm a bit frustrated. I know Senator Xenophon is a bit frustrated. Certainly we would be arguing to bring you back because there's so many issues that have been raised by your responses, and I would certainly like a chance to have a look at Hansard to actually focus my questions more carefully. So that might be, certainly that I'm just alerting you that that'll be an argument I'll be putting up. Mr Johnson, you actually look familiar. I'm sure we've come across each other maybe in the past. Did you work for Freehills?
No, sir.
Did you do any work for Rio Tinto?
No, sir.
You've done none of that?
No.
It must just be the Freehills look. It must be the Freehills look.
Work for Senator Betts,
I've had the pleasure of working for Qantas for 17 years, Senator.
17 years, okay. Mr Joyce, I had a look at one of your corporate glosses recently, and it spoke about the visions and values of Qantas. It raised a number of what it said were visions and values, safety being number one, and we've gone through that approach interminably, I think. Then the other one was transparency and honesty, and the third one was customer focus. And the fourth was collaboration and teamwork. And there's another couple which I don't think are really that important for my line of questioning. But given that you were not transparent, in my view, and not honest with the government in terms of what you were intending to do, I want to just go through a number of issues. Industrial action was being undertaken. That's the argument that you've put. Industrial action was being undertaken in the lead-up period to the decision to ground the fleet.
So is that question, Senator?
Industrial action was being undertaken. That's your argument.
We had industrial action, which I clearly outlined was causing us huge problems.
Yeah, and there was threatening. There was threatened industrial action.
There was threats on the Friday of the AGM. There was industrial action,
yeah,
as you're aware.
So there was impending industrial action as well.
There wasn't any impending, but there was rhetoric about the possible industrial action going forward. But the decision was made on the action that had already taken place.
No, just let me finish. You've gone through that. So there was a probability of further industrial action.
Right, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The probability of further industrial action. You argued that the industrial action that had taken place so far and the industrial action that was threatened or impending was a danger to the ongoing viability of Qantas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Qantas is a significant part of the Australian economy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Many businesses rely on Qantas not only to ferry goods and services, but executives and workers around the country. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the grounding of, or the threatened grounding of Qantas certainly would have a significant effect, not just on individuals, but a widespread area of the population.
As the industrial action was having in the build-up to our action, and as the industrial action would have had if it occurred for the next year, actually it would have been a lot worse, Senator, because what we were seeing was so many people that were impacted in all parts of the community. As I said, what we were seeing was large elements of the business community not travelling with Qantas and not travelling. And as I said, Senator, what we were seeing is Qantas bleeding by $15 million a week. We had all of those problems, so it was going to happen, and it was going to happen, as somebody said, we were going to be slow-baked over a year, so this was going to get worse for us, and it was going to be in a position where it was not sustainable.
I mean, let's talk about the public for a minute and not just Qantas. That's what I'm interested in. Yeah. You've said plenty about Qantas. So, with this impending industrial action, you've conceded it was threatened. So some people rely on Qantas for their health care. They have to get from remote areas in Qantas flights to major hospitals in terms of their health, don't they?
Yes, they do.
So some people would have their health endangered by the industrial action. Is that correct?
I think that was the real dilemma for us, I have to say, Senator, because with the talk of 72 hours, this dispute...
No, I'm not asking. I'll come back to that. I'm just asking a simple question that some people would have had their health affected. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the same issue for the industrial action that was taking place with the unions. So, we were in a position that was occurring for months, and the plans for people travelling were being disrupted by the union action quite more considerably than the action that we're talking about.
So the welfare of the population and parts of the population were under threat by this pending and ongoing industrial action.
We had that, I think, across the board.
Yeah, it caused significant damage to the Australian economy.
Well, up till, I think you know, Senator, that Fair Work Australia actually said that up till then there wasn't sufficient damage done to the Australian economy because what was taking place was a slow bake over a long period of time, and eventually it would have gotten there, but it hadn't gotten there at that stage.
Yeah. So what you've just outlined to me in response to questions is the outline of Section 424 of the Act. You have just now satisfied every aspect of Section 424 of the Industrial Relations Act in terms of the issues that the full bench would need to consider to terminate industrial action.
No, we didn't, Senator, because in a ruling...
I'll ask you them all again.
Yeah,
then if you're going to change your evidence, then that's okay. Then change it. But you have just outlined and satisfied every aspect of Section 424.
As I said, up till that point of time, Senator, said we didn't hit the national interest measure because, and that's what Fair Work Australia, it's not me that you have to listen to on this one, because Fair Work Australia, when they made a ruling at the weekend, said it wouldn't have reached the threshold, and it was very clear it didn't reach the threshold. Yeah. It was the grounding of the fleet that reached the threshold. Eventually it would have gotten there, but you wouldn't have had a Qantas left if in a year's time this action had continued and we had died the death of 1,000 cuds. And that was the ruling of Fair Work Australia.
Look, you've gone through all of that.
Very clear.
You've gone through all of that, but I'm saying to you, I'm saying to you that the threatening of the industrial action. Well, I don't know what's happening. I don't know. I'm trying to ask a question.
Good point.
I'm asking that the threatening of that industrial action. I'm sure you've pored over Section 424. I'm sure Mr. Johnson has given you advice. And did you get advice from Freehills on 424?
We give advice, as every big company would, Senator, from a range of legal
Did you get advice from Freehills?
We did, and Blake's and internal advice.
So you got advice from the union-busting company Freehills, right?
But I have to
That's
say,
okay.
Senator,
I thought you would have.
We get advice from a range of companies.
So did you get... I'm sorry. Go on.
No, so we
just tell me if you got advice for Freehills.
We get advice from a range of companies, Freehills, Blake's, our own internal advice, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're going to get the best legal minds that you have out there in order to be able to help you to understand what's in the legislation and how you can use it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I'm only a humble former union official and a senator, and I have over time had cause to read the Act. I have, over time, had cause to be involved in industrial disputes, and I would have to say to you that the evidence you've just given here would satisfy every section of 424 if you had have gone to the industrial arbitrator, if you'd have gone to Fair Work Australia and said, we are about to ground the airline because of this impending industrial action, and CASA is saying it's unsafe to fly. Our forward bookings are collapsing. The economy's in trouble. The health and welfare of the population's in trouble. It will cause significant damage. You satisfy every one of the elements that the full bench has to deal with on 424. You go there, you argue your point, and you can do that without either threatening. So you can do that without actually. You can threaten to do it. It's your right to do it, the lockout and the grounding. But you can go there and you can argue all of the aspects of Section 424, satisfy 424 without actually grounding the fleet and having 70,000 Australians and overseas visitors stranded around the country, couldn't you?
Well, no, that's not the case, Senator. And it's very clearly from what Fair Work Australia said after they made the ruling to terminate each of the actions of the union and the company. They said we hadn't reached that threshold. That was their ruling.
So Fair Work Australia.
Because they said the action that got us to a stage...
That got us to the stage. But that's different. I'm not asking you about the action.
Terminated.
Yeah, but I'm not asking you...
And clearly we did not. We hadn't got to the stage of the national interest.
Yeah.
Clearly we hadn't gotten to the stage that you're talking about. We hadn't gotten to the stage where CASA was grounding the airline. We're a long way away from that.
No.
So none of those things, Senator, that you said.
That's right.
We're actually there.
That's without you going and arguing these points and actually saying that the action is impending, that the action is a threat, and the action will result in Qantas having to ground. Do you accept that the Commission... See, you said the Commissioner said that the action up to now... Yeah. I mean, I don't suppose wearing a red tie is a threat to the economy. But, you know, like the pilots were doing, I don't suppose some of the intermittent actions were getting you to that point. I think that's the point the full bench made. But once you say we cannot continue with what you described as a death of 1,000 cuts, once you get to that position and say we are now making a decision to close the airline down, that is impending industrial action from Qantas.
Yeah.
That's impending industrial action from Qantas that meets every test on 424.
Well, we don't agree with that, Senator. And we had a position where that was not what we believed, that was not what we could get to. If we could have gotten to there, again, it's a hypothetical, this is.
No, it's not hypothetical, it's a practical possibility.
Because if we could have gotten to there, don't you think that's what we would have done? If that was a possibility of what we could have done, that would have been a lot easier for everybody, and that would have been an option we had taken. It wasn't an option for us, because we didn't believe that that was the case. So and it's very clearly from what we see that isn't the case. And can I say, Senator, once we'd made the decision, I keep saying come back to it, and if it became public that we were going to do a lockout and taking our action, we had to ground the airline, because that was the safety case that I had.
Okay.
So once I got to that stage where we had made that decision as a consequence of the union action, we were going to do the lockout, there wasn't an alternative to sit down with anybody and talk it through, because that safety case said we had a risk and we had to ground. So all other options then start closing off once you have that safety case.
Let's talk about this safety case for a minute. In the safety case that was argued, I understand that one of the arguments before the full bench was that the pilots would be distracted because of the industrial action. Is that correct? It's
one of the potential risks that were there, and it was the potential of distraction causing us unknown consequences as a consequence of that. And there's plenty of studies, Senator, as I mentioned.
Yeah, but look, just look.
But there's plenty of studies on this.
Look, Mr. Joyce, I'm happy to hear your answers, but I've got really limited time, and I'm just trying to get to some idea what was behind this crazy thinking of Qantas to ground 70,000 people around the world. So if you just bear with me for a minute.
Well, can I say
you're a bit like Richard Nixon at the moment. You're just trying to talk your way out of this. Don't do it, please. Just let me ask the questions.
But Senator, I'd ask you with deep respect to allow me to answer the questions. I have to say, this is starting to appear, you're a bit like a McCarthy trial, you know. Let me answer the questions the other way, because I believe that I have the right, and
geez, the boot's on the other foot then, isn't it?
Okay, I'm going to help. Good comeback. I'll give you that. Senator Cameron, do you have further questions for Mr. Joyce?
I've got heaps of questions, and I just want to get back to this issue of the pilots. I'm just going to
bring to your attention, I do have to go to Senator Eggleston and Senator Xenophon. Senator Cameron.
Okay. Now, on the pilots issue, you say the pilots would be distracted. The pilots would be distracted. Surely your pilots are highly trained professionals.
Yes.
And your pilots are the envy of the airlines around the world, and they are in hot demand. If an experienced Qantas pilot comes up, they can actually get jobs almost anywhere in the world. That's the case, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So pilots come to work with all sorts of distractions. Pilots might have fallen out with their wife. Pilots might even have financial problems. Pilots might have all the problems that ordinary people have. These are distractions, aren't they?
Can I answer?
But the training. But the training that your pilots get would make them professional enough to put any of those distractions aside and get that plane up, fly it, and get it down, wouldn't it?
But I have to say, Senator, let's talk about Qantas and its reputation. We're always going to take a conservative view on things. We have done, when we grounded the A380s last year, We did when the volcanic ash occurs, because there's no way on earth that we're going to risk the safety and lives of individuals by making decisions that do not take that as our top priority. I had my AOC holder, who was responsible for reviewing the Qantas operation, my chief pilot, my chief engineer, all doing a risk assessment on this, and they came up with that conclusion. And there's plenty of studies, Senator, plenty of studies that you can ask CASA about, that you can ask the ATSB. I've one here as an example, which is a study which shows dangerous distractions, an examination of accidents and incidents involved pilot distractions in Australia between 1997 and 2004 by the ATSB. So
I just wonder if your $2 million salary increase was a bit of a distraction for the pilots as well.
Senator, I think...
I just don't know. I'm just asking
what we're talking about is this, Senator, again, I think, you asked me a question, I'm answering the question. In fairness, let me answer that question. So we did know that this was going to be a big issue. We did know that this was going to be something that could have caused us a problem, and we're going to take a conservative view. And I have absolutely no regrets in us taking a conservative view, because that is the best thing for people's safety. And there's plenty of studies and plenty of distractions of people not taking this seriously. We had to take it seriously.
Okay, so I just do want to run through again these issues that I've raised with you. So industrial action was being engaged in. Industrial action was threatened, impending, or probable. There was there was a capacity with the decision that you had made to ground the fleet to endanger the life, the personal safety or health, or the welfare of the population. Your decision would cause significant damage to the Australian economy or an important part of it. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, as I said, Senator, to you, be very clear that we did not believe that we could have met those requirements, and I think Fair Work Australia made that clear that we weren't there. But once we'd made the decision of the lockout, which was our impending action, once we made that decision, because of our safety case, we had to make the decision straight away to ground the airline. We could not sit back and negotiate with anybody and give people the time to say, well, what would this mean, and go through a process of a day or two. We had to immediately ground the airline. That's the safety case. That was the only alternative that I had, and there was no other way around that.
Did you share any of that detail of your analysis with any of the government ministers responsible?
We did say to the government ministers, I've made my statement about what I said to both sides of politics, and I'd rather not go into details about what I said to individual ministers at different times.
Mr. Joyce, you were prepared under questioning from Senator Abetz to actually talk about how a minister's tone was in relation. So I think it's a bit rich for you to say you're not prepared to answer a simple question. Did you take the details of your analysis of what you claim were a problem with Section 424?
No, we didn't.
Did you take it to any minister?
No, on that particular question, I'm happy to answer. We didn't, because we had once we started getting into dialogue, Senator, about us taking the lockout action, and that hasn't the potential about being out there, we were in a position where we had to immediately ground the airline. That's the safety case I have. That was the position I was in. That is the only alternative that we had.
So your decision was deliberately to provoke what you believe was an unassailable outcome, an unquestionable outcome of a termination of the bargaining period?
Absolutely not. Our decision was a reaction to the action that the unions had taken, and it was the only alternative. I went through it before, Senator, very clearly. There were three alternatives for me: to capitulate, there was to continue with the debt of 1,000 cuts, for the airline bleed to death over a long period of time, and for that I was eventually getting to the national interest threshold, but it probably would have taken a year with the action that was taking place, or for me to take the only viable alternative I had under Fair Work Australia, which was to do a lockout and ground the airline. That's the decision process we went through. That's how we made that decision.
Well, it sounds a bit bizarre to me that you got the type of legal advice. If Freehills and Mr. Johnson were giving you this type of legal advice, it just goes against everything I can read into the Act, I must say. But that's a decision you made. I'm getting wound up. I've got so many questions. I haven't even started. I think Mr. Joyce can ask it the last question. Will you be prepared to come back on this topic?
I'm available to the committee. If we can, I'd like any question you have on notice to get those questions on notice and do that.
Just let me say, I don't want to engage in a debate with you, but I'm just saying to you, I don't think some of the questions I've got to raise with you can be raised on notice. I want to have a look at the Hansard. I think there's lots of inconsistencies in your approach here. I want to get some further advice on some of the answers you've given, and I'd like you to sit down face-to-face with the committee, because this is one of the biggest calls that have been made by corporate Australia to actually destroy parts of the economy to get your way. And I'm saying that you must come back, and you should give a commitment now that you'll come back and face further
Senator,
questioning.
I'm happy. Look, I've come here today. I'm the only CEO that's come here today to actually sit down and talk about this Act. I've made myself available now for over 3 hours. I've given you guys complete access. I'm happy. I'm not running away from this. I'm absolutely here talking about the decision I've made, why I've made the decision, why I feel passionate about the decision I've made, why I feel like I had to protect Qantas for the long term, why I had to do this decision, because I had absolutely no alternative.
And why you had to ambush the Australian public?
We did not ambush the Australian people. We were in a position where we had no alternative, and this is where we're faced with. And we had months of action by the unions, which would lead us to this position. And I'm happy to defend that and talk about that under any forum, anywhere, because it was the right call.
That's good, because I think you've got a lot of explaining to do as to why
Mr. Joyce
you're a rogue employer.
And Senator Cameron, I think you have made yourself available. As you can appreciate, there are a host of questions. Crikey, we've got so many questions on the bill itself too we want to get to. So thank you for that, Mr. Joyce, because the committee will have a private meeting and we will invite you back, and we thank you for acknowledging that you will come back. I notice you're packing up.
Hello, you are watching ABC News 24. I'm Andrew Gagan. You have been watching a Senate hearing into the Qantas dispute, and you've been hearing from the Chief Executive of Qantas, Alan Joyce, who has been sitting before that panel this morning, and we're expecting to hear from Virgin Airlines soon, as well as the major unions sometime this afternoon. Just to reiterate there what Alan Joyce had to say, he's saying the proposal to amend the Qantas Sale Act, which in part would be designed to prevent the use of foreign crews on domestic flights, he's saying such action would lead to a breakup of the company. And he says that forward bookings had collapsed dramatically in October. In fact, they were down 40% on previous years. That's in the East Coast market. That prompted part of their action. And he was saying the only viable action under the Fair Work Australia Act was the lockout in response to union threats to escalate their action. Well, I'm joined by Qantas' former head of safety and the managing director with Aviation Law, Ron Barch, in the studio. Ron, thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
Now, you've just been listening there to the cross-examination from Senator Doug Cameron about the issue of safety, the reason why Qantas took that dramatic action of grounding the airline. Alan Joyce saying primary reason was because of safety, because of the risk to safety. Is that a convenient excuse, or was there a real threat, do you think?
Look, the issue of human factors and aviation safety is a very real issue. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority, which is obviously the safety regulator for Australia, have considered the issue sufficiently important that they've recently implemented a new scheme of requiring airlines and air operator certificate holders throughout Australia to ensure that they adequately train all their operational staff in human factors. So the fact that there are industrial disputes and there are pressures on pilots, this is very real. But there have been instances in the past where human factors, indeed human factors relating to industrial issues, have been considered to be a causal factor in some serious fatal accidents. So it's not a trivial issue by any means.
I just might add that you do have a background, of course, having been with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. so you're aware of these particular issues and concerns. And you do have an example, you say, of where industrial action in England caused a significant issue, an accident causing the death of a number of people.
Sure. Look, there's many instances where human factors issues have been involved. There was one particular incident in England, in Staines in England, where a British Trident, or British BEA Trident, crashed shortly after takeoff. And like with a lot of aviation accidents, it's not necessarily one particular item which causes an accident. It's usually a lot of causal factors. But one of the causal factors in that particular instance, that the pilot in command suffered a heart attack, but was in the centre of a very, very fierce and ugly industrial issue between the company and the Pilots Federation, or the Pilots Association at the time, and unfortunately it resulted in 118 fatalities. But look, CASA has already indicated by writing to Qantas that they're monitoring the situation very carefully and very closely. CASA hasn't got due restriction, and they're not interested from the point of view of their areas of responsibilities, their statutory responsibilities in respect to industrial matters or commercial matters for that matter. But so long as they don't impinge or impact upon the safety of the operation of the airline.
Can I also ask you about one of the core issues, of course, at this dispute is Qantas's thoughts that it has to remain competitive on its international routes. It will need to employ a workforce based overseas, a cheaper workforce. As far as you're concerned, is that a legitimate concern, particularly as you've mentioned to me, that we're now seeing the Star Alliance likely to come back into Australia via the hookup between Virgin, Singapore Airlines, and then of course you have also Air New Zealand and Etihad.
Look, the situation in Australia, irrespective of whatever decisions either imposed or negotiated over the next 3 weeks, the situation in Australia is never going to be the same again. I guess you can put this all down to the start of it was, I guess, when they deregulated the domestic aviation industry in Australia in 1990. Shortly after that, the privatisation of Qantas. The government obviously didn't want to be part of it. The two-airline policy had been in Australia, and that led to a high degree of stability for almost 40 years. Well, as soon as you deregulate the industry and the governments divest themselves of airline interest, it opens itself to market forces. Now, the market forces, there's a variety of ways in which you can address it, but the bottom line is you have to be cost effective to be able to compete. The advent or the proliferation of low-cost carriers has really been a major event that has changed the landscape of aviation, not only in Australia but throughout the world.
So you certainly buy the Qantas line, that if it's to remain competitive internationally, it will mean the loss of jobs onshore.
Look, what it means is that they've got to become competitive in both the domestic and international market. Now, there's various different strategies you can do that, but Qantas is so reliant in terms of its international operations on the Asian market. Now, the Asian market is going to become deregulated and have open skies policy, and there's a need for Qantas to have an absolute presence in that Asian market. It's the largest market, or it's about to become the largest market. It's certainly the largest, fastest growing market. And if you're not within that Asian market, then you're not going to be in the scene internationally.
Is it an option to break the company up, to hive off its international arm?
Look, my areas of expertise is not in the commercial aspects. My area is in aviation safety and regulation. But in terms of how companies are going to do it, so long as they maintain a safe operation, that's absolutely imperative, because airlines, to a large extent, are very homogeneous in that they're very price sensitive. People are buying the lowest prices in some instances, or if the airline's got something extra to offer. Obviously, Qantas brand and Qantas brand name is something that Qantas has traded on for a long time and very successfully. So it's obviously imperative that Qantas maintains that reputation. The competition in Australia with Virgin now and with their alliances with Etihad and Air New Zealand and Singapore Airlines, that I guess for the first time there's been a genuine alternative in terms of frequent flyer and loyalty schemes from when Ansett collapsed in 2000.
All right, Ron Barge, thanks very much for coming in.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Well, as the hearing continues, Qantas says one of its international planes will be forced to land after an engine needed to be shut down. The flight took off from Singapore bound for London this morning when one of its 4 engines suffered problems. The airline expects the plane to land safely in Dubai within the next hour. The top stories: Qantas CEO Alan Joyce has been grilled by senators at an inquiry hearing in Canberra. Less than a week ago, Alan Joyce grounded the airline in response to ongoing industrial action. He's told the Senate inquiry the decision was entirely his. The senators are also examining laws to stop the airline moving offshore. 3 unions involved in the industrial dispute will appear before the committee. The Greek Prime Minister has admitted he made a mistake in calling for a referendum on the Eurozone's bailout deal. The planned referendum angered European leaders and sent markets into a tailspin. George Papandreou now says he wants parliamentary consensus and for the opposition to back the bailout package. EU leaders say Greece must adopt tough austerity measures in order to get the $180 billion package through. 3 former Pakistani cricketers and their agent have been jailed for their role in a spot-fixing scam last year. The 4 conspired to bowl 3 no-balls during the Pakistan-England Test match at Lord's last year. Former captain Salman Butt and his agent Mazhar Majid received the harshest sentences of around 2.5 years. And 5-time Olympic medalist Ian Thorpe will return to the pool tonight for the first time since 2006. Thorpe will contest the 100-metre individual medley at the World Cup meet in Singapore. He admits to being more nervous than usual, telling people not to expect miracles. Well, turning to today's other top story, Greece's Prime Minister George Papandreou has reportedly agreed to step down. Reuters news agency is reporting he struck a deal to hand power to a negotiated coalition government in exchange for support to win a confidence vote. Mr Papandreou had earlier said he was prepared to abandon his controversial plan for a referendum on the Eurozone bailout deal.
The referendum was never necessary. It was in my mind always a folly. Elections are the only fair way to ensure that the will of the people is heard. But elections can only take place after the preconditions which I previously mentioned are actually met. We cannot hold elections right now. What we need to do is to provide a wide framework of support, of parliamentary support for the October agreement, and to make sure that the Greek state receives a 6th tranche of the aid package. Once these conditions have been met, elections must be held at the earliest possible convenience.
Well, for more on the ongoing Greek political and economic drama, we're joined by Dr Sam Wiley, an Associate Professor and Principal Fellow at the Melbourne Business School. Dr Wiley, thanks very much for joining us.
Hello, Andrew.
What's your take on the drama in Greece at the moment? Obviously, we've had twists and turns as far as the Greek PM is concerned. It now, as we've just mentioned, appears that he is ready to step down in exchange for some coalition agreement to this package. Is that brought any more certainty to what is going on there at the moment?
Well, you know, I think a coalition package is a good substitute for having a referendum. They really need to get buy-in by the Greek people, and the referendum could have done that. The referendum was fraught with danger. It could have caused an immediate run on the banks, and of course it could have ultimately led to the exiting of Greece from the Eurozone and even potentially from the European Union. But they do need to have a national consensus that they are going to do the things that are necessary to get their way out of this situation in terms of austerity and liberalisation of the economy. And that takes a lot of buy-in, and the referendum could potentially have delivered that. It seems that that was a domestic political consideration on the part of the Prime Minister, Papandreou. But a coalition government, that actually could be quite a good solution as well, and that represents a buy-in from both sides of politics. If it's the case that Papandreou's Socialist Party and government is going to form a coalition with the New Democratic Party, the Conservatives, then then that is a lot of political buy-in, and that would definitely be a good step forward.
The onus on the Greek people is huge, isn't it? This is going to be with them for years in terms of these austerity measures and what they have to pay off.
Look, they're in an immensely difficult situation, and there's no easy way forward here. I mean, that's what defines their situation, is that they are looking at if they stay in the Eurozone and go ahead with the program that has been laid out, that was laid out on October the 27th, the new austerity and liberalisation program, then they are facing a decade of slow growth. They've experienced between 14 and 16%, depending on who you listen to, 14 and 16% shrinkage in their economy already, and they're looking at a bit more shrinkage and then a long period of very slow growth. And on top of that, they are looking at painful